unaware his ex-wife is married to a multi-billionaire he's desperate to partner with. He splashes mud on her while his new wife laughs. What happened next shocked them all. The muddy water hit Olivia like a breaking wave, the force slamming her against the glass exterior of Stellaris Industries so hard her phone shattered on impact. She gasped, choking on the filth coating her face, her hands instinctively reaching for the wall to stop herself from collapsing completely. Tires screeched. The Bentley hadn't just splashed her, it had stopped, reversed slightly, positioning itself like a predator admiring its kill. The window descended with mechanical precision. Brandon, her ex-husband, leaned out, his face twisted with satisfaction. "Go die somewhere else, you stinky woman." Beside him, Tiffany erupted into laughter, her phone aimed directly at Olivia's mud-streaked face, recording every second of her humiliation, her breathless laughter mixing with Brandon's as he revved the engine, once, twice, 3 times, each roar punctuating what he'd just done to her with deliberate, calculated cruelty. "Oh my God, Brandon," Tiffany could barely form words through her giggles. "Did you see her face?" "Perfect." Brandon's smile widened as he shifted into drive. "Absolutely perfect." The Bentley roared away, disappearing into the parking garage while their laughter echoed across the plaza like breaking glass. They had no idea that the ex-wife Brandon just humiliated was married to Vincent Castellano, the multi-billionaire he'd been desperately chasing for 8 months, the investor whose $50 million partnership was the only thing standing between Hammond Enterprises and complete bankruptcy. Olivia stood there alone, dripping mud onto concrete, her body trembling not from cold, but from something else entirely, something that looked like fury compressed into absolute stillness. What would Brandon's face reveal when he discovered that his ex-wife, the woman he just told to go die, was married to the man whose signature he needed to survive? Would Olivia show mercy to the man who destroyed her dignity for entertainment? Or would she let him face the consequences his cruelty had earned? And what would you do if you were standing in that conference room, covered in mud, holding all the power over the person who just tried to destroy you? In this story, you will learn that deliberate cruelty always comes back to haunt those who practice it, that the people we dismiss and humiliate often hold more power than we bothered to discover, and that respect isn't optional. It's the currency that determines whether we survive or fall when our past collides with our desperate present. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. Brandon's shoes clicked against marble as he crossed the lobby of Stellaris Industries, each step echoing through a space designed to make visitors feel small. Cathedral ceilings stretched 40 feet overhead. Crystal chandeliers worth more than his car hung like frozen waterfalls. Art that belonged in museums, lined walls of polished stone that reflected his image back at him. Confident, successful, untouchable. Tiffany's heels matched his rhythm beside him, her hand finding his elbow as they approached the security desk, where a woman in a pristine suit smiled with practiced professionalism. "Brandon Hammond," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who belonged in buildings like this. "I have a 9 o'clock with Vincent Castellano." The woman's fingers moved across her keyboard, her eyes scanning information only she could see. "Yes, Mr. Hammond. Conference room A, 40th floor. You'll need visitor badges." She produced 2 plastic cards attached to lanyards. "The executive elevators are to your right." Brandon clipped the badge to his jacket, noting how the word visitor stood out in bold red letters against white plastic. Temporary, provisional. Soon that would change. Soon he'd have the kind of access that didn't require badges or security clearance or permission from anyone. The elevator doors opened with a whisper of expensive engineering. Inside, mirrors covered every surface, multiplying their reflections into infinity. Brandon straightened his tie, ran his hand through his hair, checked his teeth for anything that might undermine the impression he needed to make. "You look perfect," Tiffany said, squeezing his hand. "He's going to love you. He's going to love the numbers." Brandon pulled out his phone, scrolling through his presentation one final time. Revenue projections, market analysis, growth trajectories that turned Hammond Enterprises from a struggling company into an investment opportunity too good to refuse. The numbers don't lie. And after, Tiffany's smile turned mischievous. "After you close the deal. After you can post that video." Brandon's own smile returned, remembering the woman on the sidewalk, the perfect arc of muddy water, the satisfaction of watching someone else's morning collapse while his ascended. "Let the world see what happens to people who get in my way." The elevator climbed in silence, numbers ticking upward on a digital display that seemed to move slower than physics should allow. Floor 20, 25, 30. Brandon's pulse was steady, controlled, the adrenaline channeled into focus rather than fear. He'd rehearsed this moment for months. Every word of his pitch, every answer to potential questions, every gesture calculated to project competence and vision and the kind of partnership Castellano's money could transform into empire. 35. "What do you think he looks like?" Tiffany asked. "I tried to find photos online, but there's nothing. It's like he's a ghost." "Rich people like their privacy." Brandon checked his reflection again. "As long as his signature works, I don't care if he's invisible." 38. The elevator slowed, its ascent becoming gradual, gentle, like landing a plane on a runway made of money. Brandon took a deep breath, held it, released it slowly. Everything he'd worked for converged in the next 30 minutes. Everything he'd sacrificed. The long hours, the failed pitches, the relationships he'd ended because they couldn't keep pace with his ambition. All of it came down to one conversation with one man whose resources could resurrect Hammond Enterprises from the bankruptcy that had been circling for 18 months. 40. The elevator chimed. The doors opened onto a floor that made the lobby look cheap by comparison. The carpet was so thick it swallowed sound. Artwork that belonged in private collections hung on walls between floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of a city spread out like a kingdom below. Silence pressed in from all sides, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of wealth so absolute it didn't need to announce itself. A woman sat behind a desk of polished obsidian, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her smile professional and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mr. Hammond?" "Yes, Mr. Castellano is expecting you. Conference room A is straight ahead." She gestured toward a hallway lined with closed doors, each one identical, each one concealing meetings and decisions that shaped industries. "Last door on your left." Brandon nodded, his confidence building with every step. This was it. The moment everything changed. Tiffany walked beside him, her excitement barely contained, her phone already in her hand, ready to capture the celebration that would follow his triumph. They reached the door, frosted glass in a steel frame, the letter A etched in elegant script at eye level. Brandon's hand found the handle, cool metal against his palm. He pulled. The door opened onto a conference room dominated by windows, and a table long enough to seat 20 people. Leather chairs, technology embedded in every surface, views that made the city look like a toy someone had arranged for aesthetic pleasure. A man stood at the far end, tall, expensive suit, silver at his temples, hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the skyline. He didn't turn when they entered. Brandon cleared his throat. "Mr. Castellano?" The man's shoulders tensed. Slowly, very slowly, he turned to face them. His expression was unreadable, controlled, giving away nothing except perhaps a hint of something cold gathering behind his eyes. Mr. Hammond. His voice was ice wrapped in courtesy. Please, sit. Brandon moved forward, hand extended for the handshake that would seal everything. His smile confident and genuine because this was the moment he'd been chasing for 8 months. Brandon settled into the leather chair across from Vincent Castellano, his presentation folder placed precisely on the table between them, his confidence building with every second that passed. The conference room felt like power distilled into architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city below, technology embedded seamlessly into polished surfaces, silence so complete it felt expensive. Castellano remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable as he studied Brandon with the kind of scrutiny that suggested he saw more than most people wanted to reveal. Your proposal is impressive, Mr. Hammond. Castellano's voice carried no warmth, just professional assessment. The revenue projections, the market analysis, the growth trajectory, all very compelling. Brandon's pulse quickened. This was going better than he'd hoped. Thank you, Mr. Castellano. I believe Hammond Enterprises represents exactly the kind of strategic investment that, however, Castellano raised one hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. Before we proceed any further, I need to make something clear. Brandon's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Of course. We're still waiting for one more person. Castellano checked his watch. Without her presence, this deal cannot move forward. The words landed like ice water on Brandon's momentum. I'm sorry, who are we waiting for? My wife. Castellano's tone suggested this should have been obvious. She's integral to all major business decisions at Stellaris Industries. Nothing gets finalized without her input. Brandon forced his smile to remain steady, even as irritation flickered beneath his professional mask. Great. Some billionaire's wife who probably knew nothing about business, but wielded power through marriage rather than merit. He'd dealt with this before. Wealthy men who let their spouses play executive to keep them entertained. Tiffany shifted beside him, her eagerness barely contained. How wonderful that you include your wife in business matters. Castellano's eyes moved to her, cold and assessing. My wife earned her position through competence, not proximity. The rebuke was subtle but unmistakable. Before Tiffany could respond, a soft knock interrupted the tension. The conference room door opened. Olivia stepped inside, still covered in mud, still dripping onto expensive carpet, her presence so shocking in its devastation that for a moment nobody moved. Castellano's entire demeanor transformed in an instant, the controlled businessman replaced by a man whose fury was barely restrained by the thinnest veneer of professionalism. Olivia. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands finding her shoulders. What happened? Who did this to you? Her voice was quiet, steady, containing depths of emotion she was clearly working to suppress. My ex-husband splashed mud on me. The words hung in the air like an explosion waiting to detonate. Brandon's head snapped up, his eyes locked on the muddy figure, really seeing her for the first time since she'd entered, seeing past the filth to the face beneath, the features he knew intimately, the woman he'd divorced 3 years ago and splashed with mud 30 minutes ago, specifically because he'd recognized her, specifically because humiliating his mediocre ex-wife had felt like celebrating how far he'd risen above the life she represented. Olivia. His voice cracked with disbelief. Beside him, Tiffany's gasp was audible. Olivia? Your ex-wife, Olivia? Brandon was already standing, his chair scraping backward, his professional composure shattering as shock gave way to outrage at her presence in this building, in this room, in this moment that belonged to him. What are you doing here? His voice rose sharp and accusatory, the same contempt from the parking lot flooding back as his brain struggled to reconcile the mud-covered teacher with the executive floor of Stellaris Industries. You poverty-stricken, stinky soul. What? The mud I splashed on you wasn't enough? You followed me here. Tiffany stood too, her confusion transforming into defensive anger. Did you seriously follow us? That's pathetic. Olivia didn't flinch, didn't retreat, didn't react to their outrage with anything except a smile that looked more dangerous than any expression Brandon had ever seen on her face during their 7 years of marriage. What am I doing here? She repeated his question slowly, savoring each word. What am I doing in my husband's company? The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Tiffany's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the table. Castellano's hand remained on Olivia's shoulder, protective and possessive, his eyes moving between Brandon and his wife with an expression that suggested he was rapidly assembling pieces of a puzzle that revealed something far uglier than he'd anticipated. Your husband's... Brandon couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't process what she was saying, couldn't reconcile the woman he'd dismissed as worthless with the man whose signature he needed to survive. My husband, Olivia gestured toward Castellano. Vincent Castellano, the man you've been desperately trying to impress for 8 months. Brandon's legs gave out. He sat down hard, his hands gripping the edge of the table to stop the room from spinning. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. Olivia, his boring, unsophisticated, poverty-stricken ex-wife, couldn't be married to Vincent Castellano, couldn't have access to this kind of wealth, this kind of power, this kind of influence over everything Brandon had worked for. Tiffany's voice was barely a whisper. But you're a teacher. You were just a teacher. I was? Olivia's smile didn't fade. Past tense. A lot changes in 3 years, Tiffany, though apparently some things, like Brandon's character, remain exactly the same. Castellano's jaw clenched. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. His voice was ice wrapped in barely controlled rage. The man sitting in my conference room, asking for my investment, asking for my partnership, asking for my signature on a contract worth $50 million, is the same man who deliberately splashed my wife with mud 30 minutes ago? The same man who told her to go die somewhere else? Brandon tried to speak, but his throat had closed completely. Brandon's world had collapsed into a single point of devastating clarity. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd built over 3 years of relentless ambition was evaporating in real time because he'd chosen cruelty over decency 30 minutes ago. Mr. Castellano, his voice came out strangled, desperate. Please, let me explain. Explain? Castellano's laugh was cold, humorless. Explain what, exactly? Explain why you thought it was acceptable to deliberately humiliate someone on the street. Explain why you targeted my wife specifically. I didn't know she was your wife. Brandon's desperation was spiraling into panic. I just saw, she was just standing there and You recognized her. Olivia's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. Don't pretend you didn't, Brandon. You looked right at me. You aimed for that puddle. You stopped your car specifically to make sure I heard every word you said. Tiffany was shaking her head, backing away from the table like distance might somehow separate her from the disaster unfolding. This is insane. This can't be happening. But it is happening. Castellano's attention shifted to her. And you were laughing. You were recording. You were participating in the deliberate humiliation of someone you didn't even know. She's his ex-wife. Tiffany's voice rose defensively. She was what? Castellano's tone could have frozen fire. She was standing on a sidewalk. She was existing in public. She deserved to be covered in filth and told to go die because she had the audacity to be in your proximity. Tiffany's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Brandon's hands were shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. Mr. Castellano, please. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But Hammond Enterprises, the partnership we discussed, This could still work. This could still be mutually beneficial. The numbers don't lie. You're right. Castellanos' voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. The numbers don't lie. Your revenue projections are solid. Your market analysis is accurate. Your growth potential is exactly what I look for in an investment opportunity. Hope flickered in Brandon's chest. Fragile, desperate hope that maybe this could still be salvaged. But numbers aren't everything, Mr. Hammond. Castellanos' hand was still on Olivia's shoulder, protective and unmovable. Character matters. Integrity matters. How you treat people when you think there are no consequences matters more than any spreadsheet you can show me. Please. Brandon was begging now, all pretense of professional composure abandoned. Please, my company will collapse without this investment. 18 months of work will disappear. Jobs will be lost. Everything I've built, everything you've built on the backs of people you deemed unworthy of basic respect. Olivia's voice was steady, calm, containing none of the emotion Brandon might have expected. People like me when I was supporting your dreams with my teacher salary. People like whoever you've stepped on since then to get where you are. People like the woman you thought was standing on that sidewalk this morning. Someone powerless, someone who didn't matter, someone you could humiliate for entertainment. Brandon's vision was blurring. Olivia, please. We were married for 7 years. That has to count for something. It does count for something. Her smile was sad, knowing. It counts as evidence of exactly who you are when the masks come off. The man who divorced me the moment my usefulness expired. The man who erased me so completely from his memory that you could see me on the street and only recognize an opportunity for cruelty. Castellano moved to the conference table, his posture radiating finality. This meeting is over, Mr. Hammond. Stellaris Industries will not be partnering with Hammond Enterprises, not now, not ever. You can't. Brandon lurched to his feet. You can't make a $50 million decision based on one mistake, one moment of, I can make whatever decision I choose. Castellano's voice cut through Brandon's protest like steel. And I choose not to do business with men who treat people as disposable. I choose not to invest in companies run by people whose character is so fundamentally compromised that they celebrate causing pain. Tiffany grabbed Brandon's arm. Let's go, let's get out of here. But Brandon couldn't move, couldn't process that this was really happening, that 30 minutes of calculated cruelty had just destroyed 3 years of building, scheming, sacrificing everything for success that was now evaporating like smoke. Security will escort you out, Castellano said, his tone suggesting the conversation was finished. And Mr. Hammond, if I were you, I'd prepare for other investors to reconsider their positions. Word travels fast in our circles. By tomorrow morning, everyone who matters will know exactly what kind of man you are. The threat landed like a death sentence. Brandon's knees buckled, but Tiffany caught him, her own face pale with the realization that the video on her phone, the evidence of their morning's entertainment, might end up being the final nail in a coffin they'd built themselves. Olivia watched them stumble toward the door, her expression unreadable, her mud-covered suit a testament to cruelty met with consequence. As the conference room door closed behind them, she finally allowed herself to take a full breath. Are you okay? Vincent's hand found hers. I'm perfect, she said quietly. Sometimes karma just needs a conference room and perfect timing. Outside, Brandon and Tiffany waited for the elevator that would carry them back down 40 floors, back to a ground level where their entire future had just been rewritten by choices they'd made when they thought no one important was watching. The doors opened. They stepped inside. And as the elevator descended, Brandon finally understood that some bridges, once burned with deliberate cruelty, can never be rebuilt, no matter how desperately you need to cross back to the other side. Dear viewers, deliberate cruelty always carries a price we can't anticipate, that the people we dehumanize often hold more power than we bothered to discover, and that character revealed in moments when we think no one important is watching becomes the evidence that ultimately determines our fate when past and present collide in rooms where all the power we thought we had suddenly belongs to someone else. Brandon's cruelty cost him everything in 30 minutes. His mistake. Assuming Olivia was powerless. What would you have done if you were Olivia? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell us what lessons you learned from this story. Don't forget to subscribe for more captivating, educational stories that will change how you see the world.